Welcome, everyone. Thank you all for being here. Hi, Mubina, Rosie. Good evening. Thank you for joining me at the Leaders Dojo tonight. If you don't know me yet, let me introduce myself, or rather, let me share my screen first. So just let me introduce myself. If you don't know me yet, my name is Chee Seng. I'm a writer and a content strategist, and I'm also moving into training and coaching, which has been a transition that has been happening in the past 1 year after having spent almost 25 years as a writer and a communication strategist. So I guess age is catching up on me, and I do feel the urge to pass on my insights and knowledge, as you see sometimes in old kung fu movies. You know, the master is always looking for a disciple. So, and that's where I am now at this moment. Hi, Rajiv. Thank you for joining. So this show is actually a part of an initiative by this company that I'm with called Communications Leadership Academy, right? Communications Leadership Academy is a boutique corporate training outfit that designs training programs for companies. And together with 3 other partners, we offer a 360-degree approach to soft skills training, coaching, and organizational development. Now, and this show is part of our vision for communications and leadership, right? The intention of the show is actually to spark conversations about leadership, communications, and branding, and how they are so essential and integrated today. So twice a month, every second and fourth Tuesday, I talk to experts, leaders, and change makers to get their insights into these topics. I like this to be a very conversational show. I'm not so much thinking of it as a interview, but more as a conversation, right? So I'll be having conversation with these experts, and I invite you to join these conversations as well, right? So that we can all learn together and gain the insights from the experts. The expert that I have with me tonight, it's my great honor to introduce Norlida Azmi and to have her on my show. Oli spent 18 years in the banking and finance sector, leading teams in Singapore, London, and the Middle East. She returned to Malaysia in 2014 with the aim to make a difference in talent management in Malaysia. She's a strong champion of digital and agile transformation and total well-being of the workforce. She's also champions diversity, equity, and inclusion in corporate boards through her work in 30% Club Malaysia. And that's where I met Oli. I had the great pleasure of working with her, and I find that she is such a dynamic woman and a great leader. And sometimes she sets the KPIs, and we will put on the WhatsApp group screaming faces. But overall, it's a great pleasure to work with Oli, right? So let me just bring her aboard. Let me stop sharing this. And please help me to welcome Oli.
Hi, good evening. How are you,
Hi.
Chee Seng? And hi
Thank
to
you
everyone.
for being here.
Excited to be here. When Chee Seng invited me, I said I must make time, especially this at night, you know?
Yeah, I'm so glad you actually made the time, because in the past was it? I think it was less than a year that I've been working together with you. I mean it when I said that it's been an absolute privilege. The targets are scary sometimes, but Oli is absolutely amazing in handling everything very well. All the stakeholders, whatever she presents to us, she has already filtered all the difficult parts, and so even though the parts that come to us sound a bit crazy, it's actually already the very filtered ones.
You're being modest, Chee Seng, you're being modest. But it's always a delight. I found Chee Seng, I was talking, and then I found him, a personality to work with, and it's been a joy as well, Chee Seng. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, thank you. I'm so flattered. Yeah. Okay, so maybe Oli, maybe you can tell us a little bit more about yourself, maybe your personal or your professional background.
Sure. Like Chee Seng mentioned, I was like close to 20 years overseas. So when I came back to Malaysia, I had a little bit of our own culture shock. You know, it's different when you come back for Hari Raya or holidays, and then coming back, you have high expectations. And why I say that is particularly when I was in the Middle East, the people just love Malaysians. You know, they know us for being so creative and so dedicated. And you know, we have a very amiable style of engagement. So so for me, it's like I've always thrive in things that are where you generate idea, and then you know, she's saying we work together a lot. So something about me is I've always grown up in a very diverse background, and maybe it will explain how it shapes me. Yeah? I'm from Penang, so all the foodies of Penang say hi if you are. And even though my father was a civil servant and we would move a lot, but you know, I grew up in a Malay family of which my aunts and uncle would be speaking Hokkien and Indian. I'm like, okay,
Wow.
yeah, I know. It's like, but I don't speak either of that. My husband is British Brazilian. Don't ask me about soccer or football. And my son-in-laws, one is a German and one's an American. So you know already from where it is, you have a difference. And both my sister-in-laws are Chinese. So you can imagine the richness that I'm used to. So I'm quite blind when people talk about differences, if you will, because my life has been so enriched with it. So that has shaped both my personal and professional well-being position. So I think it resonates with what she's saying, was talking about what do I stand for. So absolutely, diversity, equity, and inclusion is one of my passion.
Right. So yeah, and definitely you're a very passionate person, Naoli. So I always
They call me intense, you know.
that's another word. so so today we are talking about what kind of leadership that is required in the world today, right? So just now I was just before the show just talking to Oli. I mentioned that true leadership rises during times of crisis, right? During war, during famine, and that's where you see real leaders step up. Not just the leaders that hold the position, but actually the leaders that are acknowledged by people and people want to follow them, right? So we don't have a major crisis like war and famine now, but we do have the pandemic at the moment, and we do see that we need definitely good leaders. But in the normal everyday world, right, where in the VUCA environment, we have a lot of small crises, right? We have technology disruptions, competitive disruptions, new competitors in the market, shifting trends, society changes. So there are a lot of small crises happening all the time, and that's where my position is that we need a lot of leadership to handle all these small crises, right? But my observation is that we actually don't have enough of it, lah. Right. So what's your view of this? You know, the VUCA world and the pandemic, or post-pandemic new normal, right? And the role of leadership in it.
I think firstly, leadership, we must always get away from that. It's the pinnacle of an organizational structure. You know, it really is not about hierarchy at all. Leadership is being able to, for me, amass quickly what are the relevant factors as we go about. And Chee Seng, you talk about the VUCA world, right? And every day is a change. So I'm seeing the greatest, and it could be many fronts. So let's just talk about the industry I operate within, as well as the environment. The pandemic, nobody runs away from it. So I've seen how organizations have pivoted from really putting employee well-being first. And it goes beyond just the sanitization. Because, for example, the new normal is going to be so fluid. And sometimes when we talk about the new normal, we are almost thinking like, oh, we haven't reached the new normal. Actually, we are in the new normal already. It's just that it's very fluid. And I think one should be also cognizant that different countries and different societies are at different levels of new normal, right? We're so envious. We see our friends who are overseas and walking about with no mask, and we are under lockdown. So we are under different stresses. So do the leaders still able to keep the corporate objectives, but balance well with the compassion for the well-being and the productivity? And I think this is a big challenge. You cannot just say that it's not a switch on, because it's the small actions that's going to make the difference. And I think we hear a lot about empathetic leadership is being key if you pivot from a well-being perspective, but also think for the future that we used to work from home is for us at Axiata no longer a reaction to the pandemic. I'm very proud that we made it a policy. So now we're thinking forward, how do we move in terms of the hybrid world? How do managers become effective when you're managing 30% at home, 20% in Starbucks, another 50% in the office, right? So those I find leadership is you're able to move. But I also find leadership is, in this pandemic, people talk about life and livelihood. Chee Seng, how do you make the business continue to be viable? So I do believe leaders have to be able at some time and say, look, I cannot go on total democratic process. After I've gotten your inputs, I have to make a decision that caters to both sides on balance. I think you need courage sometimes to go that leaders. They say leadership is those that make a decision when it's 49:51, not when it's all.
Right.
The other leadership I wanted to talk about, Chee Seng, is I always believe in fluid leadership. Because these days we talk about task management, right? Not hierarchy. So we bring people with the right skills to deliver for the organization. And then people galvanize towards that kind of a leader, and the person may not even have a C title, but it gets things done. That to me is where that adaptability, agility, and creativity is very key from a business side, and the empathy and just making time to listen. So that to me are the things that I see. Chee Seng, every company has this leadership model. So what we have really looked is what are the new collective skills, which used to be specialist skills that we need to see in a leader to handle the digital thing. So I'm quite passionate about developing leadership traits, but also identifying young leaders. Exposure, give them confidence, so that I can see the millennials taking over from the boomers and things like that.
But you raised a very interesting point, only 2 points actually. So I just want to quickly go through that. First, you mentioned about companies pivoting to really take care of the employee well-being. All right, and including not just the financial or the obvious HR functions, but actually really wholesome, holistic well-being.
Yeah.
But how would that look like in a very established, hierarchical system?
Chee Seng, recently we were stitching all these things together. So we want to look at well-being from a holistic perspective. So for me, the easiest one is the first one is the very obvious well-being, which is your physical, nutritional, emotional, right? And to try and remove that emotional well-being to be less of a stigma. So, you can partner with all these counseling companies, but if you don't get your employees to be a proactive, your well-being, you're keeping psychologically safe balance, as well as your body, you jog, you go on the treadmill. And that's the mentality we want to get at. And the other one is also what we call safety, apart from the physical thing, that creating that psychological safety where people in our ecosystem can articulate how they feel, what they want to do. And that's what we are also putting under safety, the 2 elements. And the other one is what we call our new ways of working. And this I already mentioned to you, Chee Seng, having what we call flex at Axiata. You flex your space, you flex your time, because you're measured by deliverables and it's based on trust. And it takes a lot. It's not as simple as what, and we can give flex benefits and all. And also the factors that go to the well-being are not always that obvious. So our well-being program also talks about community events, because people have feel good factor, right? The right hormones get generated. So we're trying to launch our volunteer program, our inclusivity programs. And, it's very interesting when you see the good hormones coming out. So that was one. And the other thing is we are also big on sustainability. And why I say it's good for the well-being, they say that gardening helps to give you some peace and remove depression. So we don't have a big office, so we do hydroponics farming.
Wow,
And
in the office.
in the office, and it
Wow.
was just a pilot before we were all taken away. So the planting give people calmness. The harvesting, when we said, okay, let's go and harvest the salad and have it with your sambal belacan or whatever, and it creates collaboration. So you see all these angles that come in. So our program is really holistic. Oh, the other one is on Axiata cares about my growth. So it's just not teaching you how to do digital coding. We are also putting some curated learning. Please learn about the stresses that digital connections bring to you. So those are our 6 elements, Chee Seng. So for me, it cannot be a fad. It has to be sustainable, and it's well-being that I feel will resonate well, particularly as our workforce comes from the millennial, the Zenders, and today you taught me a new word about the teenagers. What did you call them?
The Gen Alpha.
The Gen Alpha. They're not going to tolerate where you like saying, take care of yourself on all these things, because that integration has happened. So I think that's where you well-being has to be a very well-knitted value proposition, and you constantly embed it as a way of working, and that's the only way that I feel it will infuse into the organizational culture.
Yeah, and that leads me to my second point, right? Because all these things is very cultural. It's not just individual programs, because I believe if you just make it as individual programs for people to participate, it becomes burdensome, right? Because it's add on to your daily hours. But if it's part of culture, it's part of working life, and add on to what you said, flex your workspace, flex your work time. It becomes. I'm getting a picture that is very dynamic. It's very natural, organic, flexible kind of workspace. I can't imagine, honestly, Axiata being a multinational hierarchical company. How does that work within such a organization?
We have 2 very simple values across all our group. It's just called uncompromising integrity and exceptional performance. Because then you can drive so many things from it rather than have many fancy words, right? So how do we translate this? But the culture that we then layer of it is called MAD. We at Axiata love to be MAD because it stands for modern, agile, and digital. And so we use the methodology of nudge, right? Because you nudge a little bit behavior and then it goes along. I also feel that when you're doing a cultural, I have in my HR strategy called Amplify the Winning Culture. So, it's how do let's not talk about this typical SWOT analysis. Let's just focus on how do we leverage on our strengths. When we are so locked down, right? She said, I want to focus people on the positivity. How do we leverage on that? So we are incorporating within the MAD culture that elements of well-being, that elements of inclusivity. And what we're trying to do is via this nudge methodology, because you can't force people to change. You can persuade them to change, then it becomes embedded. And also we try and find role models. We try and find makers. And it's not always the bosses. I always try to look at I always say we have 6 generations in the office. Your alpha has not entered, the 10-year-old have not come, right? So we have interns who are the Zenders, right? And then I have millennials, and then I have my Gen Xers. We must never forget about the Gen Xers, right? And then it's like me. But Malaysia is also, there's a fair amount of board involvement. And there are 2 generations at the other end. So for me, in terms of generations, how do I harness the strength of each of the generation? Because there is always going to be some conflict or generational gap.
Yeah, that's right.
Which could cause some undercurrents.
Yeah,
so
that's a good point. How do you manage that? I don't think the generation gap is that far anymore. It used to be between really father's generation and children's generation. Now I think generation gap is happening in about 10 years difference only.
Absolutely. But it's for example, if you talk about from a company perspective, right? How do you loyalty? Does it really matter loyalty? And then you ask a boomer, right? What? And he says, no. I move with times. Then I say, okay, to you, what is loyalty? Then the person said 10 years. I said 10 years to a millennial is like a dinosaur lifetime, right?
Yes.
I think the value proposition now moves is, will we be able will we be able to leverage on all the capabilities as the workforce move? And when coming from the employee perspective is, will we enjoy? Will we feel very fulfilled? I don't think anybody. I think some people who are privileged, right? We want fulfillment. I mean, we must acknowledge there are people who take a job because they need to feed their family or themselves, and maybe in the future then they can go into the job that they want versus what they can get access to. Because employability is a big issue right now. Those are some concerns that is permeating, and I think this is where leadership comes in as well. Chee Seng is to make that change, to build the future data scientists. And brains are so smart, the young ones. It just comes out like that. So if we have a systemic programs across the companies and across an industry, I think this is where future leadership comes about, because they have the capabilities. And then the other thing that we must build into the future leaders is confidence.
Yes, which actually segues nicely into the next question that I have. What role does leadership, communication, or branding play in this environment?
Oh, they're so intertwined. I think these days, I think we had a chat a little bit, and one of the conversations I had recently is about personal branding, corporate branding, talent branding. It's all what do you stand for? And I think branding today, one of the core things that is in branding is authenticity. You can brand yourself whichever way, but when you live through it, then people will check back against your brand, your personal brand. And I think your brand gets amplified by your communication. I always feel that communication skill is so key, whether it be written or it's verbal. And it doesn't matter if you don't speak the Queen's English. It's how much you can relate. You have the confidence to actually share your feelings. Some people are naturally shy, and I think people who are in that ecosystem could help in bringing them out. And I think this is where Chee Seng, during these times when we are isolated, I feel that the channels and capabilities of communication has also shifted. Some people are so much better in real life. I mean, I was just observing myself. When I speak, I love to throw my hands all over the place, And then I said, okay, maybe in the screen, my hands will look like crazy, but as I get more comfortable, my hands now still fly all over the place, whether I'm talking to the board or I'm talking to you. And because that's the way I am. And I think this is where you have to. When I went to college in the States, Chee Seng, my English professor said to me, Malaysians write very well. Is American, but they tend to have mosquito call, so long-winded. Whereas the American style is, you say what your objective and then you give the substantiation. Because when you communicate, he said, you want to communicate with impact and you want to write for persuasion, because you always want to get somebody to get. So those were the early communication learnings I was taught in college, in university in the States. So I said, okay, I won't write any more mosquito coil story. I will go for impact. But it's quite true, So I think leadership, communication, and branding are so intertwined, and because especially when, like I said, it's not leadership at the hierarchy, but leadership to everything that you present. So how do you connect the story, and how do you communicate and influence the ecosystem around you?
And you mentioned authenticity. I think that's a pretty popular buzzword now. But I've seen some marketing, branding articles, and it gives me the impression that they think that, okay, when we brand with authenticity, authenticity, we have to do this, we have to the way it's being spoken about, it gives me the impression that it's something that you put on,
Yeah.
right? You put on, and then when you go off from the office, okay, you can be your real self now, right? But when you're in the office, or when you're representing the company, then okay, you got to put this on, right? Because that's authentic. So what do you have to say about that?
I think Chee Seng is going to be so much more difficult to have two personas, in my opinion, because somebody's going to catch you out.
Mm.
Because, firstly, it is a much more integrated world, either digitally or physically. We're more connected as a community. And if you say you stand for DEI, and yet somewhere along the line, I don't practice that, somebody's called me out, somebody's going to out me, as they should. So if and I think it's the behavior and the conduct and the language that depends how it is. You're quite right, Chee Seng. Sometimes when they say authentic leadership, it's almost like greenwashing on sustainability, right?
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, and yet you will see a disconnect. I think there's less pandering to people who assume to be great leaders. People do call it out. I mean,
Mm.
that's of course is very challenging, but I do agree with you. It's awful when it's whitewashing as authentic. To be honest, I would like cringe. I'm like, seriously, you said you're this, but you're doing contrarian.
Okay. Oh, I'm trying to look at Rajiv's question here, but I think it's not so complete. Uh,
Najib is trying
must
to type as
manage.
fast as I talk, is it?
Yeah. So maybe Rajiv, you can just type in again your actual question. I'm so sorry. Yeah. So the the disconnect, I really agree with you, and I think in today's transparent world where social media is so open, it's easier last time, 20, 30 years ago, when there was just a handful of media owners.
Yeah.
Brands could very easily manipulate the image, right? Now today, everybody with a mobile phone is a media owner. They can broadcast anything they like, and they have an audience. If you're an influencer, you have an audience of thousands.
Oh
So
yeah.
yeah, so there's no hiding for brands anymore. If you're not consistent and you're called out, and if that conversation has legs, and we have seen this before, right? Certain brands have been called out,
Yeah.
and I wouldn't say it would destroy your brand, but it would chip away at what you're trying to say your brand stands for.
Absolutely.
And over time, with enough people, once it reaches a critical mass, then that's the end of your brand,
Absolutely. And I
right?
think the old people would call it reputational damage.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, haven't heard that for a long time. It just shows how old we are.
Ah, not you, no, but it's I'm always conscious because whilst I may be an individual, because we are Asians perhaps, yeah, I always feel that I am a reflection of my parents, my upbringing.
Mm,
So I'm always very conscious about that. And I'm also conscious that I represent my husband, and also would
mm,
my children be proud of me. So I'm very conscious about this. Those are my primary audience. Yeah, Chee,
mm.
when you say that everybody is a brand manager, I always say that when you share your thoughts, it's okay. The people that want to hear you would love your thoughts, and the people who hate you are going to hate you anyways. We
Yeah,
must not be so fragile, and I
right,
think that comes from courage and strength at the core. And I
right.
think also attributes to your authenticity, right? Because if you want to be so popular, you will stray. But my worry
Yeah,
is when you stray, you like doing backstep dancing, and fall off the cliff because you
yeah,
don't know where to go. And I think this is where you must first identify who are your critical audience that you are talking to, and it's important on a personal and on a professional. And then when you're guided by those objectives, that to me really brands your authenticity. Uh, you know,
and and that actually brings up another question in my mind, because we see that um, the young people now, very, very young people, I mean, the ones probably who are Gen Alpha teens, you know, and those who are just coming online, there's a lot of individualism, right? And even there's, I mean, the very, very popular um, inspirational memes now talk about, well, you don't have to be concerned what anyone else thinks of you and all this kind of stuff. So if you have the value that, okay, I need to make certain people who are valuable to me, I want to be accountable to them. I mean, how would you, you know, guide or nurture a generation of people or certain people who buy into this idea that I'm not accountable to anyone but myself?
I think that's going to be a challenge, Chee Seng. And I think the greatest influencers will be their parents.
Mm.
Because that would be, and then as you know, there's always going to be a period where I'm not going to listen to my parents, I'm going to listen to my friends. And I think that's when it gets a little bit challenging. So I do feel that we cannot, when, especially now at the job, right? Everybody says, oh, you need to shift this behavior. And I'm like saying, I can't. This one already fully baked even at 20 something. So I do believe the influence of the society and values should go as early as what you're thinking about. Now, if individualism is big, I do think that the immediate audience there is their parents, right? Is this what you want to do? And actually, how the young people behave is part of the parents doing, right? Because that's
not a very not an opinion that people like to hear.
I know, but I think that's the main influence, and sometimes it's so difficult, right? And you cannot abdicate and say, "Oh, school will handle it." And she's saying, but this lockdown and isolation makes me a bit worried. Is some of the younger generation are deprived, for example, college life, that interaction, to be there together. Now, you can connect visually, but it's a different experience, and I do hope that it lives enough such that some of the experiences that are best felt to some percentage in person will come for for the younger generation, because I think that will also address a little bit of the perceived individualism.
But I do think that this will take a lot of leadership, empathetic leadership especially, because I coming from a education background as well. I've been a teacher for over 20 years. I see the trend. 20 years ago, kids, if they're rebellious and you yell at them, they'll just keep quiet. But the most they'll do is just they'll just forget about their homework, right? They just won't cooperate with you.
Yes.
Now I see a lot of my students. Let's say, for example, they didn't commit themselves to their work and they make a mistake, right? And I say, you need to correct this. So again, they don't put themselves into the work and they make the same mistake, or even worse. I say, okay, you need to correct this. And very often the response I get is, I already did it. Why are you still giving me wrong? And I cannot blame the mentality behind this, right? So if this is the generation that's coming up into the workforce, right, in let's say 5 years time, 10 years time, I mean, what would the leadership requirement be to handle these kind of situations or this kind of mindset?
So I think this is where, if you talk about that generation coming into the workforce, right? So I think Chee Seng, we have to invest on the millennials that will be actually managing these people. And sometimes they only give top training, right? But actually, it's middle managers, the managers that are everyday. So like you said previously, there could be an instructive leadership, and that has so gone out of fashion. So you have to coaching, right? But coaching is not natural. So when we said that, okay, tell the people managers, I'm going to give you a training or exposure to coaching conversations, and then I'll get this roll up in the eyes. It says, Ollie, I know how to coach. That itself already tell me you cannot coach, because even the millennials, much less the Zenders, they want a conversation, and they want and apart from conversation is one, they want access, one, they want content. So they want a two-way feedback, and this is this is this two-way feedback is not a natural thing of previous generations, right?
Yeah,
You
yeah,
listen. This one, I
yeah. Last time
tell,
superior talk, you all listen only.
and then how many times you want to spar? Sometimes they say, "Oh, so exhausting," right?
Yeah,
And Chee Seng, I want to bring a little humor. This, sometimes we've got deliverables, right? And I love having a multi-generational workforce, but sometimes got deadline, So I will, to be honest, for the most part, I will tell them, like, the story of how people go to the moon, right? But sometimes I will tell them, hello, can you just do this for me today? Tomorrow I will explain why the sun rises. Because, there's no time. And I think that's some of those pressures that we face at work, right? Because we're in a hurry to deliver deadlines, right? So somewhere along the line, but I see that when it's a two-way learning, I learn from the younger generations and the younger generations learn from me. That's why I love reverse mentoring. I really love reverse mentoring, where the mentor is someone junior, right? And then they take the seniors to accountability. And in a bank that I worked for, everybody was avoiding the CEO, because how does the mentor say, "Hey, you're late," or something like that?
right.
So no matter what levels you are, and the younger generations are not shy about taking people to accountability, such that the older generation says, "So rude, this new generation," but actually it's
Mm,
not. You know,
yeah,
it's just to understand the psyche. That it's not rudeness; it's just the way
the
the
way they speak.
generation is
Yeah,
operating today,
that's
and
right.
that cause and then it becomes translated into, I can't talk to the person, I cannot coach the person to success, because everybody use the word coach, but what is actually coaching?
Yeah.
Mentoring and sponsorship, those are key traits that leaders deploy over different life cycles and in different circumstances.
And again, I think it comes back to really culture, mindset, and really a lot of agility. I like to say it this way. I like to think of it this way. Parents have raised this generation, right? We can't blame them. They have been raised this way, right? They've been taught or conditioned to think this way and behave this way. So we can't now, like you said, fully baked already, 20 somethings. We can't now come and say, oh, okay, this is a problem with you. Whether this is a problem or not a problem, they are still in the workplace. Something has to be done,
Yeah.
right? So we can't be dismissing entire generations of people.
No, we can't.
Yeah. So okay, let's take Rajiv's question. He's got it now. I strongly believe that everyone looks up to leaders for guidance and outcome perspective. Looking to VUCA leaders provide vision, shape the future, build relationships, manage change, and effective representation of the organization. And above all, this means they must be engaging socially, culturally, and politically. What do you think about this?
It's a very powerful paragraph, Rajiv. I absolutely agree. I think one of the things that I always hear is that purpose must be well articulated. And Rajiv, that goes to what, the vision. So they look for a leader. There's a reason why you have a leader, right? I mean, for me, I always need for my boss to, like, I must be able to say, okay, now I know why you're the boss. I'm lucky that I can say that to my boss, So, and then you feel that's it. And you must be very culturally sensitive, especially in the space that we live in, right?
Yeah.
In terms of the organization I operate, we are in 11 countries, and everything is very different. So
Yeah.
I love engaging with people, but the people that I would engage in Nepal will be different from that in Bangladesh. Whilst we are Asian or South Asians, there are still subtle differences, and
Yeah.
you must show respect. And that's the other thing, Chee Seng. Respect is so key. When that mutual respect, I respect you for whatever, and it's not because of position, not because of age, but because of what you do and what just a simple conversation. You respect a person regardless of rank and level, and I think that's the beauty of it. You also read politically, and unfortunately, I'm so I'm not the best person to opine on that. I wish I was. I navigate in the corporate and the personal coaching space much better.
how do you set the baseline then for such a diverse range? But even if you're not talking about cross country, right? We're talking about Malaysia itself. There's such a diversity in terms of race, religion, ideologies, ideas, even age now, class as well. Working within the same organization, your regional where you come from might also give you certain quirks. So how do you set a baseline where everyone can operate together, and not step on each other's toes and eventually step other in the back?
Chee Seng, it's a very interesting question because we have just consciously laid out the tenets for what do we want to do when we speak about inclusive culture. So how do I build my working group? So I have my regional working group, but in the organization, in one of the entity I learned that actually when I involve such diverse, just at the working group, so I must have a Malay, a Chinese, an Indian, and a mix of a mongrel. So that's okay, right? And then I must have
Yeah,
all.
I'm the male representation in the 30% club.
Yes, yes. And
Comms
we
group.
love him really. He plays to that a lot, Then I get a lot of perspective. And Chee Seng, when you came on board in our working group, when you gave that translation, what half the sky means from a Chinese culture, I was so gobsmacked because you're always learning something new. You think you know, but you don't. Because I'm not a Chinese, so I would know the richness of your heritage and that perspective. So you must always respect the other persons, and then from that you build the baseline. So we've got a corporate culture, for example, right? Chee Seng, I was mentioning. So we're getting this baseline, and there's a lot of tools. Tools are one thing. Is what do you do to take it to the next level, such that collaboration becomes easier. People dare to speak up because power distance is very big in Malaysia, right? How do I get that confidence? And then also very honest conversations, not just because my boss is in the room. The worst is like, oh, in front of the boss, everybody say yes, yes. At the back, oh my God, we're going to die how to do this,
Yeah.
And I've had conversations where we say sidebar, sidebar. And I said, why? If we are at this level, we must trust each other and be able to talk this. And that is key in how you baseline and take it out. I hate to say you have to measure, but you do have to say what are the behavior indicators represents the culture that you want to build.
And
So
it comes back to culture, right? Culture, and also it comes back to leadership as well.
It's like
sets the culture.
Absolutely. So we have the society culture, the organizational culture, right? So the blend of the interfaces are very interesting. And whilst you talk about diversity based on all the other things, an element that overlay there is your diversity of thoughts and diversity of experiences. So it gets to be this very complex intersectionality, So it's like on some days when I have time, I always think about what are the friction points and what are the cohesion points, and how do you amplify the cohesion points?
I think it takes a great leader, who can be so agile in their own thinking to allow for diverse views, but at the same time can be so firm in principles that okay, this works, this doesn't work, and
Absolutely
brave enough to make their decisions.
Cannot be
let's take
all the time, because other people looking for some direction, especially when there's so much volatility and changes that's happening every day.
That's right. Let's look at this question. Can you share a little bit about how leaders deal with employees' imposter syndrome? Oh man.
Are you talking about employees who feel that they don't have the confidence to be who they are?
Right. Let's assume that because it sounds like it. If it's not, can you just type in a correction? Otherwise, we'll tackle this one as it is, lah.
For me, that imposter syndrome generally comes up a lot when we were talking about, the women imposter syndrome, right? They always feel like, how come I'm at this level? Actually, I'm not as capable as what people are thinking, right? And I have sensed that this is actually coming from a lack of confidence. There is actually a great talent in our organization who says, oh, Oli, I'll never be able to be CEO. And I'm like saying, no, you can. Now let's dissect. Why do you think you cannot? And that's another thing I think Chee Seng, leaders have to spend time in conversations. We cannot always be running from point to point. You know, these days everybody complains about the burnout that comes from back-to-back
Yeah.
meetings. So where do leaders find their time to engage with the people on things that will matter better? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Talking about how to solve this problem is easy, in my opinion, if you
Yeah.
get the right idea. But going deeper to what is affecting them at that time and things like that takes investment. And
Yeah.
what we're trying to do is also, you know, we're disallowing 1 hour meetings. We're saying 45 minutes. At least I have 15 minutes to go to the washroom or walk about, or at least call somebody or just a chat. Not a work chat, but just a chat, a fun, a laugh, or something like that, you know. So I think that's key. Leaders have to invest time to know their people, and then increasingly you spend less time because you already have got some broad
Yeah.
parameters. I have found during this time that simple call engagement, a simple WhatsApp like "How are you?" and even if you abuse the person over WhatsApp, the person appreciate. Oh my God, there's a human connection beyond my cat, my mother, and then, you know, something else. You know, in the
Yeah. Yeah. And I think what you say is really true, because I remember I have a church member back in my hometown of Ipoh where I really admire very much. He's a surgeon and he has two clinics, right? So he has two consulting clinics and a surgery practice, and he's also a leader in my church, and not just he's at the chairman of the church board lah, right? And he sits in several subcommittees, and he's not the sit there do nothing kind of person. He's actually hands-on involved, and he's got national level and district level positions as well. And I'm looking at him, where does he find time to do all this?
you
You
know,
know, but yeah.
no, go ahead, Chee Seng.
Yeah, so and I remember one time when I went back to visit, and he saw me in church, and he stopped and said, "Chee Seng, how are you?" I said, "Yeah, I've got 5 minutes." So he rattled off this whole list of questions, asking me how I am. Okay, good to meet you. Let's go, and he's off. I said, "Oh wow, this guy's use of time is so efficient."
And I think that's becoming increasingly important. Some efficiency of use of time. You know, we were saying some of the tips, or not the tips, some of the ways to keep sanity from this work from home via everything digital, right? Can we not try and maximize everybody? Just put 1 hour for everything. Bring the whole village to have the meeting. Why? You know, what value does it add? It doesn't increase my leadership quotient or anything. I'm just making people more miserable. So I think we have to ask simple tips about, you know, and this is the reality of the new normal, which is very evolving. My previous
Yeah,
the previous president and CEO of Axiata used to call it the evolving norm rather than the new norm, because they say, Ollie, it hasn't really settled down yet, you know. I think that's a little bit, and I think the other big thing that you mentioned there is leadership also calls for humility, and I'm seeing some points here. It's like,
yeah,
you know, it's like we're all human, right? And that
yeah,
vulnerability sometimes shows a fair amount of humility. You may know a lot, but you don't have to boast about it, right? It's not the fancy clothes that make you, but it's just who you are, and you're accessible, and you don't wear all these achievements as your badge of honor, but who you are and how you relate to the human being. Humility goes
mm,
a long way.
yeah. And I think that's really true, because it goes back to authenticity as well, right? If you're authentic, people automatically have a certain level of connection and respect for you rather than putting on airs. Okay, let's look at Tang. Good evening. May I know, how do you and your company manage employees who are work from home and measure performance? And how do you help them overcome mental health issues? Oh,
So for
big.
us, Khan, we decided consciously not to use any of the tools that measures how people can be connected. We debated, you know, those tools to know how much you're connected and when you're not. We decided that maybe the nature of our work also is okay. We will obviously go by the principle of trust, and we get feedback from the people managers. How is productivity? Is it being delivered?
Mm.
So we measure by the big things, like, we're a public listed company. How did the AGM go? How did we get the results? How was your interactions with your operating companies? So of course, there are some little things that may have suffered in the early days, but that's how we measure working from home. We in terms of managing COVID, for of course those who have tested positive, we do extend them the care that is, and it's quite interesting. I was tested positive for COVID in January and February, and I had a tremendous support that should I need to time off, just okay, and people said, okay, I will handle this. Because the reality, it does impact us. I didn't have it bad. I had only a home quarantine, but there must be a lot of empathy in some of the countries where it's much more severe, and medical help is difficult. There are oxygen tanks and things like that. In terms of mental well-being, but apart from just going for the counseling availability, I think you have to stay constantly engaged so that the people don't go into that depth. I'm finding that, for example, like we were saying, these back-to-back meetings is impacting people's well-being. They are, when you are juggling your kids are trying to get into their schoolwork, and then your bandwidth is killing you, and you are having a board meeting, and your boss is screaming, and they are not living in a big home. So I think because now it's been extended, I have some managers saying, oh, I know that the person cooks their food at 11:30. So I try, when I want to have a meeting with her, I don't have a meeting at that. So you get very sensitized. So mental well-being comes with people managers really being upskilled to manage in this new environment. We have to be compassionate, but of course we cannot just be like, just give everybody what they want to do. There are some basic hours. We do ask people, like, between 10 to 3, can we make everybody at least available 3 hours so that we can all have a common time, because we flex hours, so we go by core hours.
Right. How do you then cascade this kind of empathy, compassion, agility, throughout the organization, right? Because I did some work for a bank last time, some internal comms work, and the new CEO came in, and they wanted to revive the bank, and he wanted to bring in some new culture, and it was so difficult. So how do you cascade that down?
I think you have to have some communication, a program that structures engagements. It used to be physical. So I think now that we've settled it, is the CEO has to reach out. And once he sets the tone, and everybody, the cadence will just be a rippling effect, but it takes time, she's saying. For people to say, oh, it's quite a cold company. Oh, we never used to do this. And you're like thinking, let's not take offense. How do you go forward? When you're as a leader, sometimes you get frustrated. I was just reading an article I have to share. They say that you mustn't suppress all your negative feelings, because then it's also not good. Because I was also thinking, you don't also show it all the time, because if you're a leader, you have to hold a certain level so that people say, okay, she can do it. She is having this. How can I emulate? But there are sometimes I tell them, look, guys, I'm going to kill you if you call me. I'm in a bad mood. Stay away for 2 hours. Do not ask approval. And it's like, and they know it's just a conversation, but that's the real me. And I think perfection. I think these days perfection is not a matter of being flawless, but I think perfection is being able to have an impact that matters. You can't have this. And also perfection differs from one perception to another. What is perfect to you may not be perfect to me. So I bother to be perfect.
So, okay, we're almost to the end of the show. So maybe final question. What are your 3 key takeaways for tonight?
My key takeaway from what I'm seeing here is I think your audience really look for leadership that matters, and there's empathy and there's relatability. So I think that's key. That's the well-being side. I think is very important as well. And to me, when I say what I take away is from your audience, and the fact that there is so much engagement. My takeaway is, conversations really help, because we're all trying to find the new normal or the evolving normal. So there's a lot of conversations, and clearly these are the audience that Chee Seng attracts. So so that's my three takeaways tonight.
Okay. So, any last words to end the session?
My last words is live life to the fullest, because these days the fragility has been so pronounced during this time, and I think that is a balance between personal and professional. And I always I have a hashtag: don't take yourself too seriously, and the other one is family above everything. That's for me very, very important.
All right. Okay, so thank you very much, Oli, for being here with me tonight and with all of us actually. And thank you everyone for all your comments and questions. It has really contributed to the conversation. I hope that you have gotten a lot of insights. In fact, I'm sure you have gotten a lot of insights, and I hope that you are able to practice it in your own organizations. Join me again in my next leadership dojo, where we will be talking to Andreas Don. So Andreas is a certified trainer of NLP, hypnotherapy, and timeline therapy. And the topic that we're going to be talking about is communicating with influence, how to speak so that people really listen and respond. And I think this will be a very, very useful skill to have in organizations. Only maybe you should get your managers to come and have a listen as well, right? So I'm sure Andreas, he's been in the training line for over a decade now, so he's definitely got I think significantly over a decade now. So I think he's got significantly a lot of insights to share about how to communicate with influence. So with that, thank you very much for joining, and thank you very much again, Oli, for making time to be here.
My pleasure.
And I wish you all a very good night.
Well, thank you, Chee Seng.